coming out, and also thank you to the Bunch Center for the space. This is the Black Forum, and traditionally we'll either see Arthur Ashe or Ralph Bunche during the walls, and today we have something even more in color, and so I really am glad to have this event, and also glad to see everybody here. The other thing that I want to note is, in the effort of being the department, we're about 5 years old now. And part of that, I think, is about establishing a particular kind of Black presence. And so one of the major things that's been important to me as chair is to take over Black History Month. So it's one of the times where you don't have to apologize for, this is a Black artist and it's about Black people. You know, nobody thinks February is a problem. So we try to offer a lot of Black specific programming through the department during this month. And one of those events is our event today, Illumination, artwork by Verlena L. Johnson, who's here, whose work is around. I'm gonna read a short introduction, but I just wanna give a round of applause first because I just am very taken with how beautiful it is. Just as a side statement, one of my side hustles is a spirit quest that I've been on for the last 4 years or such. And so this really reminds me of what folks in the Hindu tradition refer to as rainbow body, you know, and so I see a lot of rainbow body ascension happening in this space, so it's making me think about getting my chakras up. So I want to thank you for this whole situation. Multimedia visual artist Verlena L. Johnson is here to discuss her art from the 1990s to the present. Specifically, she will talk about what has inspired her, the symbolism in her work, and how African American studies has shaped her art and how it can be used to contextualize it. I also just want to note that there's a great attention, as we see in this room, to the role and imagery of Black women in particular. So I want us to also be noting that. Further, she will discuss some of the themes in her art, such as Black female subjectivity, Blackness, whiteness, gender, sexuality, and mysticism. And some of her art will be on display and reception following the talk. I talked with Verlena earlier, like, you got that Square app, you know, you might want to Square, I want to buy something. And so, in true artist form, Verlena's like, what is that? You know, like, I make art for beauty purposes, not because I'm a capitalist. What are you asking me, artist? You know? And so we have follow-up measures to make sure that you'll be able to be in touch with Verlena if you are interested in the art that you see here or other art that this is a proxy for. Please join me in giving Verlena a wonderful round of applause as we come up and start the event.
This is going to be fun, I think. And thank you all for coming out today. I really, really appreciate this. This is such a beautiful opportunity. As Marcus said, I have a master's degree in African American Studies. So this really is like returning home. And I'm so appreciative for not only Marcus as the chair of the department, but Ebony and Trisha for making this happen. I mean, we really put it together, and there are several friends also, art history, and my department, which is architecture and urban design, also have been very supportive for me participating in this. I'm an advisor there, actually. That's my day job. So first, what I'd like to do is just give a context for where, in my opinion, a lot of this work comes from. And African American studies was very instrumental in regards to a lot of the ideas, including Black female subjectivity, that I'll talk to, and some of the symbolism. So I will really talk about the work over the last, and sort of the evolution also of my work, which I often enjoy when artists do that, because, I mean, I think the work should speak for itself, but also, I mean, I'm here, and so I'm going to go ahead and talk, and then at the end, if there's some questions that you have, I'll be happy to answer those as well. So, this is an apple, and so we're going to just become familiarized with this going down. Trisha told me how to do it just a moment ago. And I would actually like to take this moment to dedicate this talk to Terriel Cox, actually, who's a colleague of ours, and she actually passed away this past summer. And so I want to dedicate this to her in honor of her. She was a beautiful spirit, for those of you who knew her know that. But speaking to you today about how my art is rooted in African American studies is like returning home, and I mean that with all my heart. I have been blessed to work with some of the preeminent scholars in African American studies at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. And AFM Studies has given me a very safe and rich context to grow as an intellectual and also as an artist. While a student in AFM Studies, I examine blackness, whiteness, gender, feminism, Africanisms, multiracial identity, and class from an interdisciplinary approach, utilizing discourse in history, art history and criticism, sociology, literary criticism, as well as feminist, queer, and identity theory. Some of the people who I've worked with have been Frida Heites-Figueres, Nellie McKay, Stanley James, Sandra Adele, and Michael Thornton. Those to me are kind of like my parents, my scholarly parents in a way. Art historian and visual artist Professor Tesfigorgas served as my master's thesis and also advisor and mentor. And this is actually Professor Tesfigorgas to my right, and there's a young me, I guess maybe I was in my early 20s. And we're standing in front of her piece, Returning to the Door of No Return, which is from 1990. And there's her piece, Aunt Jemima's Matrilineage from 1982-83. And this piece on the right actually is a pastel, which is absolutely extraordinary. But if you look at the symbolism, the African art, the quilt, the Aunt Jemima figure here, and I won't do this too much, but you know I have a master's in art history, so I want to do that, but I'm going to go by quickly. Seriously, it's a struggle. My MA thesis, the image text composite in the art of Faith Ringgold, form a narrative, explores Ringgold's art using W.J.T. Mitchell's picture theory to examine the meaning created by her combining images and text. It also examines one of Ringgold's story quilts, Picasso's Studio, which is pictured there, as a meta-picture or a picture about pictures, specifically focusing on black female subjectivity and Ringgold's interrogation of modernism and primitivism. Much of this research is as relevant to me today as it was back in the 1990s. It's weird when we do these retrospective things and we kind of realize that. Right is a photograph of Ringgold and I when I was graduating from the Art Institute of Chicago in 2001. I was asked to introduce her. She was being granted an honorary degree. So I got to stand in front of a lot of people in downtown Chicago and introduce this woman that I had so much respect for. So I felt very privileged and honored by that experience. Black feminist texts that were hugely influential to me at this time were Audre Lorde's semi-autobiographical book, Zombie, A New Spelling of My Name, Bell Hook's book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, Alice Walker's collection of writings, but also very influential to me were people like Laura Ann Zaldur, who's a Chicana scholar. This bridge called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color, which she edited with Sherry Moraga, was just instrumental. What I love about these images to me is I had these books on my bookshelf for a very long time and used them a great deal. So when I collected these off the internet, it was just such a beautiful feeling to me. I really do love books. And the clicker's not working. And then, of course, the autobiographical Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza as well, was a very pivotal and important text for me. But I would be absolutely remiss if I did not mention my parents. So these are my mom and my dad. They're not recent pictures, if you can't tell. That's my father, Jimmy Johnson, and he is a blues musician. He was born in Mississippi in 1936. And not only did he raise me listening to blues and playing blues for me, but he was a wonderful storyteller. So I was hearing about Brer Rabbit and things like that at home while I was studying it in the classroom, so which was a great experience. And then this is my mother, Joanne Avery Johnson, who is 10 years younger and was born in Idaho and raised in northern Wisconsin. She taught me basically how to be independent, to be women-centered, and to be a social activist. And now she's going to be with an African, militant as ever. Thematic categories that I'll cover are historical social commentary, spiritual and mystical arts, of course, and then painting journaling practice, actually, which is something that I do, and it's been very private, so you're some of the first folks to see some of these images. The importance of self-representation. People like Audre Lorde, of course, with her quote, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies and eaten alive." So this image that I'm showing you here is a graphite drawing, and it's called Sister Outsider in memory of Audre Lorde. It was done in 1992, so I was 22 years old. In 1991, Audre Lorde came to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she said to the organizers of the event, "I want to meet with black lesbians." Like, who does that? Big speaker come to the university. So I was part of a group called BLISS, Black Lesbians in Search of Self, and we were like 10 or 12 of us, like, you know, at a potluck trying to eat and have conversation with this amazing, brilliant woman. So that was very wonderful. This picture is called Black Woman in White Face. It's a selfie, or self-portrait. It's from 1991. And I actually did this piece after watching Marlon Riggs' Ethnic Notions, okay, which he did in 1987. I was so outraged with the insidiousness of those racist images, the mammy, the pickaninny, and so forth. I literally left class, went home, put on white face, and then did this posture or this gesture, and then took this selfie. And so for me, it was sort of, you know, performing the reversal of race in a sense, but I was also at the time thinking about how oftentimes African Americans are criticized, and sometimes it's intergroup for acting white, talking white, dancing white. But for me as a multiracial or biracial person, there's this inference that I'm choosing my white cultural identity or racial identity instead of my black. And it's very reductive and very essentialist. So W.E.B. Du Bois and his double consciousness was also important in thinking about how we see ourselves from, you know, the lens of the oppressor, and all of Fanon, all of these people. I'm reading these folks and doing this art. I'm totally off script, you guys. I'm just like, I knew this was going to happen. I've got to really watch time. Okay. And then in 1994, when I started my master's, so those first two pieces, I was an undergraduate, I decided that I really loved sculpture, okay? And so one of the things that I did was I started with this mixed media piece, and it's called Warrior Woman #2. And I was reading various texts at the time, and they were speaking about the cult of true womanhood, and we were talking about just how womanhood is constructed. And so this is a warrior woman, but she's not, I'm a pacifist, she's more of a spiritual warrior, but she's made with wood, and you see broken mirror and bead, and there's one of the earlier spirals that I did years and years ago, which I'll speak about in a little bit, and then there's crystals, but I was also interested in these mask forms. So you'll often note that there are masks, and I was interested in this notion of masking, concealing, distortion of one's identity. I was reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, so notions of invisibility also entered into my work. But the thing I'm proudest for, and this is an inside thing, is that these are pistachio nut shells. So I painted them silver on the inside and then used a very tiny drill. But this notion of using this space for an assemblage and using mixed media and found objects, and I'm really into the texture and just how it feels. So for me, this encapsulates this. It's a very small piece, and it's actually on a book called The Approaches to Teaching the Novels of Toni Morrison, which came out, I believe, in 97. Very proud of this piece. This is also part of that series, the Warrior Woman series, and this is #3. Then I started doing more fully pieces of wood and learning a great deal more about carving. You'll note here that I started doing joinery, and eventually I'm going to do puppetry. I'm going to go full-fledged into puppetry and using it as a symbol, but these are the earlier ones. And then this, of course, is a mask as well, going back to the mask, and then there's a spiral on the back. And there's a crystal inside, so even I'm thinking the fourth chakra, the heart, about love, you know, back as a graduate student. African American artists, obviously, both in terms of the feminist texts and you know, who to choose. So I picked Harriet Powers, who did a pictorial quilt in 1895, as being very influential to me. I also chose Betty Starr, The Furthest From Me, her Black Girl Window from 1969, and Renee Stout's Fetish #2. Strong female figures, very mystical, very spiritual, very powerful, very thought-provoking for me when I was looking at these images. And then I chose a painting by Simon Sparrow, who is an artist who used to work doing his artwork in the Memorial Union at the university. And as a young undergraduate and graduate student, I would sit next to this man who was probably at that point in his 80s, and I would talk to him about art. But he was considered an outsider art, so I started thinking about what's this idea of outsider, high art versus low art, all of these conversations. But this man, in his devotional, spiritual pieces, very much influenced by African iconography, was very influential to me. These next pieces I'll talk about briefly, actually were done while I was a student at the Art Institute of Chicago. This piece is called Blackface Minstrelsy. It's from 1999. And I took the gallery space, which as you all know is very white, and I did something very naughty. I introduced soot, and soot is very messy. But I decided I was going to stencil these black faces along the entire gallery, and basically each one of them represents an actor that donned blackface, which was a theatrical form that was very popular in 1850 and onward, and today apparently. Unbeknownst to me, a lot of people are wanting to don blackface. And then so there were names like Shirley Temple, Linnell Jolson, and Burt Williams, who was an African-American man who blackened his face. And then, as you recall, with Ted Danson's situation in the 80s, that was very controversial, and a lot of conversation ensued because of that. But one of the other things I did in this space is I put a thin pile of soot at the doorway. So as you enter the space and you're walking through the space, you're tracking it through, and of course that's uncomfortable. But to me, history is messy and inescapable. And so for me, that served as a metaphor for that. This is called Mumia Abul Jamal. It's a full, like a 3-foot marionette, fully functional. I did this at a time while I was doing work at the Art Institute around police brutality. And there were lots of conversations, of course, about the activist and journalist Mumia Abul Jamal and his false imprisonment. And of course, he's still in prison to this day. Fanon says, he who is reluctant to recognize me opposes me. I don't do political work. I'd like to say that. No, I'm just kidding. I will do it. This piece is basically sort of a mural on 2 benches in a space called Affinity Community Services. And it's a space in Chicago that I did a lot of work with LGBTQ youth with their youth program. And so for me, I just wanted to depict different aspects of our community. So, you know, this is stereotypical. I have a stud and a femme. You know, I had a little girl reading a Dr. Seuss book, Cat in a Hat. Then I pictured myself there, and then I had women who could perhaps be older and one with a cane. So I really wanted in this space for women to come down and see themselves and then sit. No, that's going too far with metaphors. And then this piece is called Witness to Whiteness. And I'm going to read for this one for sure. This is my MFA thesis project, and it's a 6-minute puppet music video installation, this is a 6-foot UFO that I built, and it was so fun doing this project, I have to say. This little puppet here is Troy, and he's sort of an alter ego type figure. And then this is a one-night stand that he had. So there's a little puppet nudity. This can be found on YouTube, Witness to Whiteness. But in the installation, it appears as though the UFO is beaming at Troy, who's playing the keyboard. And then there's a 6-minute music video. And in the video, I'm actually singing Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which is very difficult. He had lots of stuff happening there, like experience that I did not have. But I had a drum kit player and a guitarist, and we went into this space and I performed it. And so basically the video was going between images of me singing this song and then Troy on this journey of self-discovery. And how this came into being was, I was at a panel discussion on blackness, and it was an hour and a half long, and there was such a rich conversation and people from different perspectives. I'm from the Caribbean, and this is how we define blackness and why. And then I said, at the Q&A, I said, so what is whiteness? That's exactly, there was nothing. No one said anything. And so I thought, I want to figure out what a whiteness would look like to me as a visual artist, and I want to depict it. And so I thought of like the very stereotypical heavy metal music. He's got in a Ozzy Osbourne shirt, my little Troy does. I had my brother peel rubber real fast. I used railroad tracks, and I thought of all of the very whitest things, you know, culturally speaking. But it also speaks to my own whiteness, because I was raised in a predominantly white community, and my brother is white. And I was an authority. And of course, like, how can a black woman be an authority on whiteness? And you can, because I studied in African American studies. We actually, you know, with a lot of different texts in terms of ethnic options, and how the Irish became white and all of these other things. So there's a great deal, I think, but it's so normalized within our society that often people don't even think about it, I think. It becomes the norm. This piece is called Jim Crow, a Reinterpretation. And I did this piece post-MFA, and it took me several years to really shake art school off and to get productive again, but I eventually did this. And this piece I did while I was working with Rogue Artist Ensemble. Here's my friend who has worked with Rogue also. And there was a rehearsal where there was a Jim Crow character. In Punch and Judy, as you know, there's a Jim Crow character. And during the dress rehearsal, the little character puppet, his neck got wrapped around a rope and did like that. And of course, I, as a black woman, I was like, whoa, that's like a lynching. And it made me uncomfortable. But then I went and did a piece about it. Because, of course, there's all of this, you know, imagery of Jim Crow, and I wanted to give him humanity. So I created a space for him, this little theater, which there's a Jim Crow picture here as a rod puppet, but his rods are not there. And then, and other little imagery, that's Sesame Street character there, actually. And then the Punch and Judy on the sides, but they're on the peripheral. They're not the important characters. But then I created a little comic book with the first person, and Jim Crow talks about his birth, about having a family, about meeting Edmonia Lewis, who is an African American, Native American artist who worked in the 19th century. And it really showed him as his humanness, in other words. And so that was very important. And so these images are from that comic book. So the Am I Not a Man and a Brother, many of you may recognize this image. It was the abolitionist image. And then of course this is from Olympia. But in Olympia, in my version, you can't see her face. You can only see, you know, the black woman. So in terms of the recentering the black female body. And then Jim Crow, you may recognize that I used Frederick Douglass as a model, really, to interpret what Jim Crow might have looked like at that period of time, as a gentleman, really. This painting on the right is called Inside Out, and it has to do with having both an insider and an outsider position within the black church because of like homophobia and transphobia and heteronormativity. And so I really wanted to show this sort of conflict about being inside and outside. And so she has a little rainbow earring. If she didn't look queer enough, I gave that little symbol. And I love dropping little things like that so people can see that. This painting on the right is called Smokestack Lightning from 2006. And it's actually a picture of my father, who I mentioned before was a blues musician. And so, it has other blues artists in it as well, like Howling Wolf, and they're pictured here. So there's Howling Wolf, and there's Bessie Smith, and Coco Taylor, and B.B. King, and Muddy Waters. And then the train at the bottom speaks about the Great Migration, or generally just blacks moving from the south going to the north. And that's what my father did actually in 1961. And so in the Smokestack Lightning song, which he performs, and I love for him to perform it, you can hear the train, the chugging of the train, which is a trope. It's very common to hear that within music, but also the train will frequently appear in literature and art and so forth. And so that's my ode kind of to that migration. And my father, of course, whom I adore. And then this actually is from my book, The Adventures of Kai and the Magical Machines. And also I was thinking about it while I was preparing for this. It's very similar to the image text composite, in my opinion, in terms of what Faith Ringgold was doing. And so this particular image is an image from page 6 and 7. And this is a story about grandfather Gerald and his grandson Kai. He's an retired aerospace engineer who loves robotics. And so he's producing or creating this robot with his grandson. But what I really also wanted to show this image for is that Benjamin Banneker is right there, and Dr. Mae Jameson are right there. So these are two African American scientists. So what I did is I embedded them within this fictional narrative of these grandfather and his grandson. And then at the end, I included little biographies about these two historical figures, and then also gave a glossary of terms, because my son loves science, okay? And I went to redefine with him that nerdism is a fabulous thing, a wonderful thing, and it's okay to be smart, and that type of thing. So this is a book inspired by my son. And now I'm working on a book about blues music with my father, and then we'll similarly include actual historical figures and that type of thing. Now, the spiritual mystical art category. This is Spiral Woman. She's from 2001, and she's actually here. And what I'd like to do is just talk a tiny bit about some of the symbolism that's often in my work, like the halo. You can barely see it in this image, but I was putting halos in my work for quite some time, and really what that means is it means that we're all divine. You know, we are all divine, and but I also like the idea of the circle because it symbolizes continuity as well. And then the spiral symbolizes eternity, the feminine energy also, and just energy generally. You'll see the spiral appear in a great much of my work. And when I look back at it for 2 decades and I see those spirals, I mean, I think there's something there. There's something very universal for me and something that I love as a symbol. Birds are something else that you'll often see in my work, and for me, they're communicators between this realm and the spirit realm. They also have connection to the divine. And then feathers also symbolize those things, and it's a nod also to my Salish Kootenai ancestry frequently. And so you'll often see the birds. This is called I Am. It's from 2002. It's a very large painting. The I Am as a statement is considered significant spiritually. And according to Wayne Dyer, essentially it's basically declaring something in the name of God. So the I am statement, so if one were to say like, I am just a horrible person, I'm not that smart, I am, you know, this type of thing, versus the opposite, I am love, I am power, I am beauty, I am prosperous. You know, you just say these types of things. To me, it's almost like a prayer. So this is that notion again of us being divine. This is called Spirit Love. It's from 2006, and for me, all of the things about the halo and so forth, but materiality, going back to that again. This is corrugated cardboard, the hills, and these squares, and sandpaper, and this notion of quilting and creating these textures and patterns, and then reassembling them. I feel a little OCD when I'm doing this on the floor and constructing these things, and they're, you know, twine and beads, but that's that piece called Spirit Love. This piece is called Kai and Mommy. So in 2009, my son was born. Yes, he's such an extraordinary presence and spirit and inspires me in so many ways. But what's significant about this piece, I have to say, besides the Pikachu, which he loved when he saw that, he was like, oh my God, Mommy, that's Pikachu. I said, yes, sweetheart, but what about this other piece? But is that I cannot be seen. The presence of me, yes, particularly the embrace of my child, but this is what happens. So this piece really is about my son Kai, but it's also about motherhood, because this is what happens when we have children, in my opinion, for those who have to run and pick up their kids and things of this nature. Now, the other really important thing that happened to me besides the birth of my son was the passing or transition of my mother. And this piece is called Mommy's Awakening, and she passed in 2016. So I painted her obviously centrally there, but you'll notice on it flanking either side of her are the birds. And so very often the left side of things is the past and this is the future. So again, and there are the spirals, but really, you know, we think of death as this ending, and for me, really it isn't. It's a beginning, or it's just another phase, if you will, in regards to that. And so this for me was that. And then her hand is mudra, which can be seen in yoga. Really just means, it means intelligence, and so it's sort of gaining an understanding. And so this piece is a very quiet, meditative, but happy piece to me. So that was important as it relates to that. And this is kind of opposite of that because, of course, as I was mourning her death and celebrating her life, there were conflicting feelings. And so this one's called Alchemy of Sorrow number 3, Letting Go. So I was in my studio and I decided for whatever reason that putting on lipstick would be a very good idea, right? I was painting something very different than this. Put on some lipstick, maybe to elevate my mood or something. And then I kissed a piece of paper. Don't judge, but that's what I did. And then so I made these lip, thing. And then I said, oh my God, I'm gonna get my paint and I wanna start working a portrait around the lips that I just put on here. And then, a lot of times when I'm working like this, it's very intuitive. And so I'm not planning it out, I'm just feeling in the paint and I'm just doing things at the spur of the moment. And then before I knew it, I had this. And then I added the feather, and that's that hawk feather that I found in the sculpture garden. And 2 or 3 days before my mother passed, I said, Mommy, when you pass, come to me in feathers, is what I said to her. She said, okay, And so when I found that feather, that was my mother coming to me in feathers, and I find feathers everywhere. But that is that. This piece is a self-portrait, the embodiment of a lover in 2017. And for those of you who are familiar with law of attraction, that's what this is. It's the belief or premise that thoughts become things, right? That we attract to us the things we think about. So I was thinking about a lover, and I put all these attributes around this halo, the kind of woman I wanted to attract. Compassionate and sensual and playful and, all spiritual, of course, and all of these other things. And I placed the lotus flower here, and then you've got the Om symbol emanating from my 7th chakra, because this is going to be really powerful, and I'm going to really meditate on this. And then, of course, the dashiki, which actually appears in quite a few of my pieces, and I love the fabric. This piece next is just called Divine Intentionality 2018. So this is also a very recent piece. And this piece, again, has the 7th chakra and the energy coming through. It's done in graphite and charcoal, watercolor, and wash. And this piece, when the light kisses the darkness or the shadow, has to do with something that I'm actually very interested in, which is called the dark night of the soul. And this is a kind of a smaller piece, actually, it's here. And what you'll notice here is another imprint of the hand, and then the spiral. But when you look closely at the night and the day, you'll note that there are words sort of hidden. I am love, you can find it in several of the places. But one of the texts to me that is almost like a journal is, it says in the darkness, I lack definition without light, and she lacks definition without me. I will never admit it, but I seek light to understand myself, my purpose. And so that also has to do just with the relationship of things, the yin and yang of things. We often find definition in things that are perceived as being opposite, but to me, they're all the same thing. And then this piece is a much larger piece, which is there, and it's the light kissing the dark. So I was interested in exploring, and this is what artists will do in a series or what have you, some of these principles, again, but wanting to do it larger, refine things compositionally, and I placed 2 hands. And a lot of my pieces also actually have the dark night sky, which really is representative of the cosmos, and this notion that we are part of that, but we're also of that. Like all of there's this connectivity. So that's this piece. And actually I looked at, I believe, some African textiles and icons, looking at these particular symbols and chose them very specifically for their meaning. So the next category is called Painting, Journaling, Practice as a category. And this is the one that these have never been seen. These were in journals. And so this next category is really a cathartic thing, and some people do journals and they're writing in their books, things they're thinking, things they've experienced, kind of processing. And for me, I do a very similar thing, but with self-portraits. And a lot of times I won't think about what I'm doing to start with. It could be just, I'm driven to the paper and I'll just start doing this, and then things will emerge. And so the one on the left is The Dark Night of the Soul. It was done on May 12th of 2015. And then this one is If Loneliness Were a Grape. That's not the actual title, but what I did is, if loneliness were a grape, the wine would be vintage. Does anyone recognize the context of that? Or where's that from? Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day by Nika Giovanni. So I read this back in the late 80s, and I just loved that poem. It was so powerful and so beautiful. And so I put part of the poem around my head. Yeah, it seems like I was being kind of dark and
What medium are you using here for that?
Huh?
What medium?
Gel pens and markers, actually. Yeah, so very immediate, very spontaneous, very much about self-healing and reflection and introspection. And this piece on the left is entitled Journal Entry. This one is called Magic. And I actually did this piece first and then did this after, and you can see where the page flips. But in this particular journal, happy accidents happens because after I did this piece and then this piece, I worked on these little shapes, emanating here, and this duplicity and this, this multiple faces and what have you. I turned back and I noticed that those shapes were on there. Now, some people would be like, oh my God, it's ruined. I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? That's like a tea leaf. Subconsciously, there's something, and there's, and so I'm trying to reinterpret and think about sort of the meaning that's embedded, because I want to love to control some things. So I have to sometimes let go, and really just be open, and that to me is a lot of what went on with this. And just very quickly, I spilled coffee, like a whole mug of coffee on this journal, and I would say about 30% of it, 40% of it bled all over the place. I just let it go. I was like, it's fine. Some of the paintings became perhaps, I don't know, more interesting, but I was like, there's no point. But then I said, this was actually universe saying to me, stop working so small and so privately, get this on larger paper and share it. This is what you're intended to do. And so that for me was an impetus and a push, to be more mindful of that. This piece is called Tightrope, which is also here, and it's a very journalistic piece in the sense that I'm doing the tree pose and that rain exhibition that was at the Modern Art Museum. I went there and did the tree pose, and then so based it on this. But then, the piece is really self-explanatory. It's about balancing one's thoughts or brain and one's heart. It's like boom, boom. And then the writing on top really is about me talking about being on the L train, which is in Chicago, and going to the Art Institute. And I spent so much time on that commute. And I took a rope, which is in the back, and some silver metallic thread, and I decided, for whatever reason, that I wanted to embroider one bundle in the rope, the entire rope, in a good length. It's like 10 or 15 feet, which I did. It took me a month. But as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about how ropes have these dual purposes. They can be used to save people, pull people out of holes. They can be used to hang people. And so often I think things are like that. It's the same thing with the heart. There's nothing more powerful and beautiful than love until you feel jilted. And then it's complicated. And the same thing with the thinking. We can overthink, right? But what a beautiful thing when things are in balance. And so that's what this piece is about to me. And then the last two pieces that I'll share are called Night and Day. And then I guess 1919, I was going to say, when did I do that? That's when I did it. And I actually did 4 pieces together within a 24-hour period. I just painted, experimented, and I used salt actually. And the first 2 paintings were a lot looser than this. And then they started getting a little tighter. And then when I did that piece and then decided I wanted to do something that complemented it, that's where the night and day or the pairing came up. And one of the things that you'll notice about my eyes, and all of the beginning ones, it's frontal, it's eyes open, there's an engagement with the viewer. That's about your subjectivity, that's about your engagement, that's about, I'm not an object, I'm a subject, And so then what I started doing is looking at Buddha figures, and started looking at the eyes being closed and the head, and sort of this introspectiveness to that. And so I started actually doing that. And so a lot of the pieces then, like this one, began to experiment sort of with that sort of relationship. I'm also a great deal more vulnerable, I feel, and so that's what this shows. But then I wanted to have my eyes open because there's a dawn of a new day, and there still can be engagement. Again, it's really about the balance. The other thing that I did with this painting very quickly is that I took lavender oil and I sprinkled it on the painting. And about 3 years ago, I took a Reiki 1 and 2 course, and these are have to do with energy work, or your prana, the life force that moves through all things, and it's for the purpose of healing. So rather than just focus on the symbolism, the symbols that I included in my painting, I wanted to start also infusing them with this energy that I believe with all of my heart and being exists and can be affected in terms of how we relate to other people. And so I worked very consciously or intentionally on doing that. And then I also used and smudged, and that's why I've included Meditating Woman here. She's setting the stage. Because spirituality to me and the life that we live on a daily basis, there is no disconnect. It's all one and the same. How we enter a classroom or our offices or the gym. I think about prana running through my 7th chakra when I'm at the gym. I kid you not. And when I'm doing those reps, I think of things like that. Not always. Sometimes I'm just listening to Missy Elliott. But sometimes I'm very mindful of the energy. And so that's this, and then you see the spirals. But in terms of a conclusion, I just want to say that I'm really excited, as I said, to be here speaking to you. I'm excited about this opportunity and what this means, because I know all but maybe one person, you're new, and I know you now, and I know we're going to talk. And so I just really love this as an experience to share my work, and I thank you for coming out. If people had any questions at all.
Since you have these two pieces up, you did them on the same day?
Yes, I did 4 of them within a 24-hour period. So I started them in the day, woke up in the morning, and then finished them the next day.
So, hold eyes.
Yeah.
There's a feather in the day
Yes.
and not in the night. That was
Correct.
obviously intentional for what reason?
So it's not to be depicting within a 24-hour period. In other words, they're both me, but you note also the way I've drawn myself is very differently. And I could analyze perhaps why I did that and why my self-portrait started out very loose. Actually, that was part of one there as well. That meditative piece was, I think, number 2, and it became much looser. And then I became more and more interested with representing myself in a more realistic manner, and is what has happened. So that resembles me, in my opinion, mostly because of the locks, to be perfectly honest. But that is me in the daylight with my eyes open. The most subjective one, but the other does as well. And I think self-portraits, they don't have to be, realistically representative of the person they're depicting. A lot of times they're just about a particular emotion, a particular time, and they can really deal with other things. And of course, a lot of people in different parts of the world think of portraiture in very different ways than sort of what we do. We're really into realism here, actually, and especially photographic realism. But I like other types of work as well. Similarly, these are more about spiritual, and that's a more universal imagery to me. That could be anybody. They could be beings from other planets, as far as I'm concerned, but they're more about an idea. Yeah.
I know you mentioned that your work is really intuitive, but I was just curious, for the pieces that incorporate text, is the text usually what helps to inspire the artistic background, or is the image inspiring the text?
Always, I would say, for me, except for with the books, the images come first and the text comes later. And often, even with journal entries, I'll title them. I absolutely love titling things. I love naming them. Naming is another trope you'll find very often, a new spelling of my name. This idea of giving definition. So, on occasion, I'll think in terms of, especially if it's my own writing, but usually the text comes later. Any other questions?